Hi, this is Papa Joe. Thank you very much for joining me for reading today. In honor of Indigenous People Day, I have a book by Ralph Martin and David Shannon called The Rough-Faced Girl. Two interesting things about this story. One is it'll remind you a little bit about a Cinderella story, and Cinderella stories have popped up in cultures all around the world, and this is a Native American version of one. And the second thing I'd love to see you notice is the artwork. The artwork in this book is simply beautiful, and that's most of the illustrations that you'll be seeing. Once upon a time, there was a village by the shores of Lake Ontario. Lake Ontario, one of the Great Lakes. Off from the other wigwams in the village stood one great, huge wigwam, and painted on its side were pictures of the sun and the moon and the stars and plants and trees and animals. And inside this wigwam, there's said to live a very great, very rich and powerful, and supposedly very handsome, invisible being. However, no one could see him except his sister, who lived there too. Many women wanted to marry this invisible being, but his sister said, only one who can see him will ever be able to marry him. And now in this village, there lived a poor man who had 3 daughters. The 2 older daughters were cruel and hard-hearted, and they made their youngest sister sit by the fire and feed the flames, and when the burning branches popped, the sparks fell on her. In time, her hands became burnt and scarred, and her arms too became rough and scarred. Even her face was marked by the fire, and her beautiful long black hair became ragged and charred. And those 2 older sisters laughed at her, saying, "Ha, you're so ugly, you're just the rough-faced girl." And they made her life very lonely and miserable indeed. One day, the 2 older sisters went to their father and said, "Father, give us some necklaces. Give us some new buckskin dresses. Give us pretty beaded moccasins, for we're going to marry the invisible being." So their father gave them these things. Dressed in their absolute finest, the 2 girls marched through the village. All the people pointed and stared. "Look at those beautiful girls," they said. "Surely one of them will marry the invisible being." And if the 2 girls were proud and hard-hearted before, they were even prouder now, and they walked haughtily through the village. At last they came to the wigwam of the invisible being, and there was his sister sitting waiting. "Why have you come?" she asked. "We want to marry the invisible being," they answered. "That's why we're here." "If you want to marry my brother," she replied, "you have to have seen him. Tell me, have you seen the invisible being?" "Of course we've seen him. Can't you see how pretty we are? Can't you see the beautiful clothes we wear? Oh yes, anyone can tell truly we've seen the invisible being." "All right then," she said quietly. "If you think you've seen him, then tell me, what is his bow made of?" And suddenly her voice was swift as lightning and strong as thunder. His bow?" they stammered in surprise. His bow? We know. By turning desperately to one another, they whispered, "What shall we say? Let's say it's the oak tree." "It's the great oak tree," they answered. "No," said the sister of the invisible being. "No." Oh, she saw at once how they lied. "Tell me," she continued, "if you think you have seen my brother, the invisible being, what's the runner of his sled made of?" We know, cried the 2 sisters. But whispering feverishly again, they wondered, "What shall we say? What shall we say?" "Let's say it's the green willow branch." "No," said the sister when she heard that. "No, you have not seen my brother. Now go home." "Just test us fairly," they exclaimed. "We've seen him. Just don't ask us all these silly questions." "All right," said the sister of the invisible being. "Come with me." And she took them back to the great wigwam and sat them in the seats furthest from the entrance, which are the guest seats. Soon they heard footsteps coming along the path. Then something stepped inside. Though they heard breathing, the two sisters still couldn't see a thing. Suddenly a great bow and a beaded quiver of arrows appeared in the air where they were set down. But though these two girls sat there, their eyes wide open all through the night, they never saw another thing. And in the morning, they had to go home, ashamed. And the next day, the rough-faced girl went to her father and said, "Father, may I please have some beads? May I please have a new buckskin dress and some pretty moccasins? I'm going to marry the invisible being, for wherever I look, I see his face." But her father sighed, "Daughter, I'm sorry, I have no beads left for you, only some little broken shells, and I have no buckskin dress. And as for moccasins, all I have left are my old, worn, cracked, and stretched out pair from last year, and they're much too big for you." But she said, "Father, whatever you can spare, I can use." So he gave her the things that he had. Then she found dried reeds, and taking little broken shells, she strung a necklace, and she stripped birch bark from the dead tree and made a cap, a dress, and leggings. Then, with a sharp piece of bone, she carved the bark pictures of the sun, the moon, the stars, the plants, trees, and animals. She went down to the lake shore and soaked the moccasin in water until they grew soft, and then she molded them to her feet, but they were still too big, and they flapped as she walked out of the wigwam. Then all the people came out of their wigwams, and they pointed to her, staring. "Look at that ugly girl," they laughed. "Look how strange her clothes are. Hey, go home, ugly girl. You'll never marry the invisible being." But the rough-faced girl had faith in herself, and she had courage, and she didn't turn back, and she kept walking straight through the village. And she walked on, and as she walked on, she saw great beauty in the earth and the skies spreading before her. And truly, she alone, of all the people in the village, saw in these things the sweet yet awesome face of the invisible being. At last she came to the lake shore just as the sun was sinking behind the hills, and many stars came out glittering like a fiery veil in the darkening sky overhead. And there, standing by the water's edge, was the sister of the invisible being waiting. Now the sister of the invisible being was a very wise woman. When she looked at you, she didn't just see your face or your hair or your clothes. No, when she looked at you, she would look you right in the eye, and she could see all the way into your heart. And she could tell if you had a good, kind, or a cold, hard, cruel heart. And when she looked at the rough-faced girl, she saw at once, though her skin was scarred and her hair burnt, her clothes were strange, but she had a beautiful, kind heart. And so she welcomed her dearly, saying, "Ah, my sister, why have you come?" And the rough-faced girl replied, "I have come to marry the invisible being." "Ah," said the sister very gently, "if you want to marry him, you have to have seen him. Tell me, have you seen my brother, the invisible being?" And the rough-faced girl said, "Yes." "All right then," said the sister, "if you have seen him, tell me, what is his bow made of?" And the rough-faced girl said, "His bow? His bow is the great curve of the rainbow." "Ah!" exclaimed the sister in excitement. "Tell me, if you have seen my brother, the invisible being, what is the runner of his sled made of?" And the rough-faced girl, looking up into the night sky, said, "The runner of his sled? Why, the runner of his sled is the spirit road. It is the Milky Way of stars that spread across the sky." "Ah," cried the sister in wonder and delight, "you have seen him. Come, sister, come with me." And taking the rough-faced girl by the hand, she led her back into the great wigwam and sat her in the seat next to the entrance. That's the wife's seat. Then they heard footsteps coming along the path, closer and closer, and the entrance flap of the wigwam lifted up, and in stepped the invisible being. And when he saw her sitting there, he said, "At last we have been found out." And then smiling, he added, "And oh, my sister, but she is beautiful." And the sister said, "Yes, yes, she is." The sister of the invisible being gave the rough-faced girl the finest buckskin robes and a necklace of perfect shells. "Now go bathe in the lake," she said, "and dress in these." So the rough-faced girl bathed in the waters of the lake, and suddenly all the scars vanished from her body. Her skin grew smooth, and her beautiful black hair grew long and glossy as the raven's wing. Now anyone could see that indeed she was beautiful, but the invisible being and his sister had seen that from the start. Then at last, the rough-faced girl and the invisible being were married, and they lived together in great happiness and were never parted. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed that story. Bye-bye.